America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker, the president of the Job Creators Network Foundation.
And I'm Toni Angelini, Senior Vice President of Operations and Advocacy for Job Creators Network.
You can subscribe to the show at salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcasts from. Today, we're joined by Richard Polak. Richard's experience spans more than 35 years, including having advised over 300 of the world's most innovative multinational organizations in global expansion. His specialty is in global human resources and labor His specialty is in global human resources and labor. Richard also has a book out that's titled Work Smart Now: How to Jumpstart Productivity, Empower Employees, and Achieve More. Richard, welcome to Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself and where you come from.
Well, I come from Japan, essentially born in Japan, or made in Japan, I like to say, many years ago, and as an Army brat. So essentially born an expatriate, and then traveled around the world wherever my father dragged us around, right? And then learned different cultures wherever we went, whether it was Germany or even different cultures in the United States, many cities and states in the United States as well. And then got into global human resources and worked for some very large consulting firms. Deloitte, was Johnson & Higgins, Mercer, Gallagher, MetLife even, and then started my own firm and then built that up as an international consultant. It was the largest privately held consultancy, and then sold that to one of the large mega consultants and got in their executive committee as a Fortune 500 company and helped them run that company and primarily the global department of that company.
So early in my career, I actually was in human resources before I ended up where I'm at in advocacy. And but I was focused in the recruitment side of things. So I was front-facing with employees and candidates for positions, and always trying to obviously match them to the culture of companies, where they would fit best, and skill set, but also values alignment, things like that. You talk about in your book compassionate productivity. Tell us about that.
Well, it is a means of getting employees engaged in a proper, humane, sensitive way where they become empowered in their own jobs, still accountable, but empowered to do work mostly on their own with a little bit of direction, and then therefore do the best they can do. That will make them more engaged. That will make a business more money. It'll make the employees and you happier, essentially.
One of the things that you touched on in the book that was really interesting to me was what you're basically considering an old adage of work-life balance. And you say in the book that essentially, like, work is life, life is work. And it's probably time for us all to stop trying to, balance everything at the same time. I've said so many times, you can have it all, but you can't necessarily have it all at the same time. And I'm a firm believer in that. Tell us a little bit about how we sort of got to the work-life balance place, and what you see projected into the future of what that will look like.
Okay, well, I think we got there by just virtue of let's separate our personal lives. And in doing that, what we've done is bifurcate ourselves. And our work lives, I feel, and our personal lives are one and the same. Look, we all know what happens if you have a bad day at home and you go to work. You might likely have a bad day at work, right? Or you carry the work home with you. It's all one and the same. If we accept that, it makes it a little easier to then manage your entire life that way. I'm not suggesting bring your work home to work. In fact, it's the opposite. I don't believe in work harder. I believe in work smarter. That's the book, Work Smart Now. And not only that, it's not just me. It's the studies that show there's a diminishing marginal return. There's a chart in the book shows you reach a certain peak of productivity, and then you're done. And anything more than that, you're not just done, but you have negative productivity. So the work you've been doing for 8 hours, you've just maybe lost 2 of them for your employer and for yourself. So combining them all is my vision of the future, just accepting that's the way it is. These are our lives. And the more you can accept that work is part of your life versus separating it, then I think you'll have a more enjoyable life.
I couldn't agree more with that sentiment. I actually started working from home about 10 years ago. And it was such a relief because one of my biggest frustration points at the time when I started working remote was I had a commute. I was commuting an hour. I was trying to make that hour productive, which is, easier said than done. And then the first 45 minutes of my morning reporting to the office was catching up. How was your weekend? How was your weekend? And in the back of my mind, I had work to do. So once that was all cut out, I was almost overwhelmed by how much my personal productivity increased. And, then the pandemic hit, of course, and everybody was working remote. So the pendulum really fully swung. But now I think corporations and small businesses that are applicable are having a hard time figuring out, do we mandate that employees report to this, this office that is costing us a lot of overhead, or do we not? What do you see that employers can do to A, make sure that their employees are productive as possible, and B, make sure that their resources are being allocated to appropriate places?
Okay, well, going along the lines that you're talking about remote work, and that's such a big topic because employers, like you said, have bought this office space. They can't even get out of the leases until their lease is up, right? And then, I've been in those offices. You have too. They're mostly empty. And then the employers say, okay, fine, I can't win that battle, but come in 2 times a week. And then they require employees to come in 2 times, and that's a big struggle for them. What we've learned during COVID is that we can still be productive without having to be in an office. Now, what we also learned during COVID, for younger people who are training, it is actually better to have interaction, face-to-face interaction, so that they can learn. So it's a real difficult situation for employers, for CEOs. One thing's for sure, you cannot make people work harder, or you cannot make them work. And, Gallup poll shows that somewhere between, depending on what you look at, 13 to 23% of the workforce is engaged, period. That means the rest are disengaged. Let's just not even say, maybe they're not engaged. Disengaged is the worst. 16% of the workforce is completely disengaged. So you're completely losing them and making your business very difficult. When you're dealing with small businesses, I'm super proponent of a small business. I had my nice small business when I built it. And then when I sold it, it was a huge culture shift for me. I've forgotten because I did work for big companies before I started my own business. But when you have a small business, you can touch people in a whole different way. And America is built on that. And when you can touch people in a special way, they know you care about them. Or if you do as a CEO, and you should, and if you don't, you shouldn't be in the business, any business to begin with. But you generally want your employees, you look at them as part of your family in some ways, an extended family. So if you give them the empowerment to say, you want to stay home, you want to work at home, that's fine. We'd like you here. Maybe you can come in. You make your choices yourself. But that's the way it's going in the future. Not going to be able to force people to go back to work. It's just not going to happen anymore. And I wish employers would stop forcing people to do that because it just makes themselves less productive.
Good point. I made the decision to take a position that allowed me to stay at home and work after I had my first daughter, which gave me a lot of flexibility. But yeah, it was, and that was 22 years ago. So it's a really different time. You're talking to an organization at Job Creators Network. We were virtual before COVID. Before, we like to say we were virtual before it was cool to be virtual. But we have a productive group, but we also have leadership in our organization that understands the give and take of, we need you to be responsive, but we understand that you're also working from home and you may have some other things that take some time from your day during the day. So we've moved in that direction a long time ago. We started out in that direction, actually. So that's been great for the people who come on board with us because it allows that kind of flexibility. But what are the biggest takeaways from the book for managers or small business owners or even entrepreneurs who have sort of that vision of, I want to start a business? What are some of the biggest takeaways from your book?
Okay. Well, first, in the book, it's all research-based, all evidence-based, not my research. Every chapter of the book has a business case that shows very clearly if you do X, you will get Y in return. In the end of the book, if you take a services organization of 1,000 people, you follow the precepts of the book, not hard and not complicated, then you will increase your revenue of 1,000 people by $330 million a year. So the business case is there. It's not my research. I just found it and just proved it, and it's there, and then put it all together in the book. But there's precepts in the book that's really clear. In order to increase productivity, in fact, it almost should be, but in the word sometimes overused is engagement, but all roads lead to Rome. All roads lead to engagement. And if you can get employees to get engaged, then you're going to increase your productivity. We talk about working remote. You work from remote, Elaine. Toni, you do as well. I'm just making that assumption, right? You'll find your way if you engage to get your work done in a really super way. If you're not engaged, no matter what, you're not going to want to do the work, and you'll find ways not to do it. Whether you're sitting in your office or you're sitting at home, reasons not to do your work if you're disengaged. So it's irrelevant about where you are. It's how you feel about the work you're doing. And that comes from leadership and management. I can't fix that. You can read the book 100 times. If you're not a good leader or a compassionate leader, and you really don't care about people, this book isn't for you. It won't matter because you won't even identify with the first few lines of the book. But if you're that person who wants to make a better world, a better company, and have employees that want to be there and work and enjoy the same passion you have, the precepts of the book will be very helpful. And it's all based on, if you look at a circle of productivity, and then you have technology, you have absenteeism, presenteeism. By the way, presenteeism is worse than anything. And you look at your own individual productivity or your own optimization. And there's a whole bunch of things you can do yourself to do that. That's not too hard to do, but take baby steps to do it. Then all that equals increased productivity. Is there a single one thing? It isn't. It's a combined bucket of 5 different buckets in the book. And you add all those up. Like example, technology. I don't know what you're looking at now, but I have a 40-inch screen in front of me and my laptop 17-inch screen attached. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 windows open. All right. Now, for someone who's not trained, you go, wow, that's how can you that's just lose focus on everything, but doesn't, right? Because over here, I'm looking at your website. Over here, I'm looking at productivity and burnout and stress and bullying. But as I'm talking to you, I'm already prepared for the interview as best as I can be by having all these windows set up. Now, if each one of them beeps, or as soon as one of them beeps, and I don't have my notifications off, right? The focus thing you can put on your phone, say focus for 1 hour or half hour, whatever you want to do. Then if that beeps, then I've lost 10 minutes. Boom, boom, boom. I just lost 10 minutes of my time. Having these open is fine if you're trained to use them open, but you can't multitask. In fact, there's no such thing as multitasking. all there is the brain moving faster from one thing to the next. And if you have a really good brain that can do that, I'm sorry for you. You're really smart, but you're only hurting yourself. All right.
You actually just touched on you touched on two things that I had notes here to bring up. The first was presenteeism, which I that really resonated with me because we've all seen it. Being inside, present, and accounted for at the office, but they're on Instacart shopping or reading a book on Kindle, like you reference in the book, and there's a lot of people I think get away with the presenteeism because they show up at the office a few minutes early and they're strapped into their chair all day, and people are assuming that they're getting their work done. How for employers, how do you identify, who's sort of like the biggest offenders with the presenteeism, and then once you've identified it, what are the steps that you can take to empower your employees to buy more into their positions and their importance in their companies?
Okay, first, there are always going to be employees, no matter what you do, are just not going to be performers and are there just for a paycheck. Right? So it should be a small percentage, should be 5 to 7% of your company, and there's really not much you can do about that except find some way to get them out. And if your culture is set properly, if you have a culture of we're all in this together, and if you succeed, I succeed, and and then we make more money, then it all comes back to you too, and we all have better standards of living, then those people that aren't following that path, they don't stay long. They work themselves out, primarily anyway, just by the culture itself. All comes down from the top down. There's ways to measure presenteeism. It's really hard. In fact, I did a presentation up in the Silicon Valley, and that was their number one issue, for the HR people, how do I measure presenteeism? And there is actually a really good tool that's I think it's the World Bank or the OECD. They used it years and years ago. It's the same thing to use to measure presenteeism. But you still, even if you measure it, it's not about that. You've got to continually force engagement. When I say force engagement, I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean the surveys. Understand why people are engaged. Maybe you as a leader is doing something wrong. Small business as well, anything you can learn from. When I was running my small business, I had a right-hand woman, basically, who would just come to me. She had a beat and everything, because people aren't going to talk to the CEO. They're afraid to talk. Not everybody's going to be that open. But she was able to get people to talk, and she would tell me what I needed to do to change the company or things were going awry, and help me an awful lot. Every CEO needs that, and that's usually the human resources person.
Yeah, absolutely. The other note that I had made was on the multitasking, and this is another thing that really resonated with me, because I can't tell you how many times I've told my kids, you can't do two things at the same time well. And it's certainly, I think in this day and age, you've got the cell phones, the texting is going on while you're trying to be on a conference call or do a podcast, and you're trying to stay dialed in. And it's sort of that instant feedback mechanism that I think we've all been sort of trained to now with these phones. But how do you avoid that? How do you sort of teach people that it's okay to do one thing at a time, when especially the younger workforce has been raised with a device in their hands, watching TV, doing homework? I mean, we're sort of raising the ADD generation, I think. But how do you unring some of those bells?
All right. You bring up something actually dear to my heart as well, okay? And I agree, we're raising an ADD generation. And it's really sad. And the Surgeon General's come out saying we need to have something on these phones that says they're bad for you, okay? I have two lives. I have my first life, I have two children, a daughter of 22 and a son of 17. And I have a second life. I have a son that's 4 years old, okay? Our 4-year-old son, second marriage, he has no access. He doesn't have that much interest in it, to TV, to anything other than reading books. He doesn't watch cartoons. None of those devices are there that's even available. They're available for everybody else. When people come in the house, like my older son, and he wants them to watch something on video, particularly TikTok, no, take it away, move it. It's not here. We don't allow that in this house. You go, oh, he can do it. He can do it. No, he can't. He might be able to, could do it, but I'm not allowing him to do it. We're not allowing him to do it as parents. So we're starting from scratch here in this generation. I've been struggling myself with what can you do? Because I just said to my son yesterday, I said, he's on it. I picks it up, goes like this, just does this, and then puts it away. Right? There's a dopamine effect, right? We all, the endorphins, we all know all these things are coming out with the studies are proving that this is just harmful. But what do you do with a 17-year-old, 22-year-old, a 30-year-old, or me? Okay? And I say to him too, I have difficulty putting this down. All right. I've been looking for a way, and maybe you can help, but I haven't found a way yet to undo that. That train's taken off, and how do I bring it back? It's very hard because he's not stopping it as much as he wants to also. It's turned into a form of addiction. And I don't know what to do. I can't give you an answer to that that's really clear and precise and simple.
Our workforce has changed a lot post-pandemic, obviously, with people working from home and everything like that. I read a report by McKinsey that talked about how 55% of Gen Zs actually report that they've either been diagnosed with a mental health issue or they're being treated for one. That's an extremely high number and staggering. And I know you talk about anxiety and stress and depression in the workplace, but I think that we can all agree that part of that, those mental health issues are coming from, they cited that about that generation is spending an average of about 4 hours a day on social media, not necessarily during work hours, but an average of 4 hours a day. How do we combat that? How do we help these people, one, avoid the mental health issues that we're seeing these younger generations deal with because of social media and the addiction? Because I do agree with you, it's an addiction, and allow them to obviously be more productive in the workforce as well, but still allow sort of those creative juices to flow, and that which leads to a good cultural workplace and creativity and ultimately happiness and productivity. It's just such a balance for a business owner, and in our case, what we're focused on, small business owners.
Yeah, I think first it starts with parenting if it's a child, and you just can't have them use the phone. There are times when you put the phone aside. When you're having dinner, for example, any kind of meal, you might want to take it away or say we're all putting our phones aside. We don't use it at the table. Whenever there's any kind of family activity you wouldn't allow it. It's something to maybe earn in a family. If you do your homework and you do the dishes and you finish your chores, then you can spend 15, 20 minutes, a half hour on the phone or whatever social media you want to do, but not make it part of your lives. With respect to work, this goes back to really the understanding of compassion and productivity. Can't make people do something they don't want to do. And if they're going to be on their phones or their social media, the only thing you can do is encourage them not to, or give them courses on how to help themselves to do less of it. I think everybody's very much aware of it now, particularly in the workforce, how destructive it is. And employees want to help themselves. If you care about them, legitimately feel like you want to help them, you offer them means to do so, to help them get off of those devices. And that doesn't mean get off the devices and get to work. It means let's help you as an individual and you and your families, and to have better, more richer lives, which is interaction with people. Just because of your home and you're remote doesn't mean you can't have interactions with people. It doesn't have to always be on the phone. It shouldn't be. There are all kinds of books on habits, and it's a habit. And how do you break a bad habit? or even a good habit, you wouldn't break that, but any habit at all, how do you do it a little bit how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? You do a little bit at a time. It's the only way I know that in my habits, I've been able to have any kind of success. Now, with my son, I'll talk personally, and he's in therapy because of this ADD. They call it now ADHD, I think. And we also have to try not to label him. Okay, that's another issue. But he's trying to manage himself and his anxiety and therapy's helping. Unfortunately, is a rich person's tool, therapy, sadly, because poor people can't afford it, or may not even know it exists for them that much. But I'm able to give him a little bit of help that he's able to talk to a counselor or therapist to help himself.
I just wanted to make one more point on sort of the prioritizing workplace culture, and that all goes into it. Keeping Gen Z's happy in their work, because they really do prioritize that over a lot of things. With the having more free time, having more time off is important to them. And I read that a Gallup survey found that the cost of replacing an individual employee for an employer that's not prioritizing workplace culture can range from 1/2 to 2 times the employee's annual salary. So if you look at a company that has 100 people with an average salary of, say, $50,000, you could have turnover and replacement costs of anywhere from $600,000 to $2.5 million a year. So the higher the employee, what they found was that the higher the employee rated the workplace culture, the more engaged they were and the more likely they were to stay.
Yeah. SHRM did a similar study, Society Human Resource Management. It was 219% was the number they came up with that it costs for every employee that leaves. So it's very, very consistent with that.
Absolutely.
I thought it was really noteworthy in the book that you talked about, making sure that you consider the source, and that there are a lot of studies out there that demonstrate a lot of things, but you have to look at where did the study come from? I recently read an article that the 10,000 steps a day recommendation that is, just sort of out there right now, popular culture, that originated from a marketing study that a step monitoring device did. It was like 20 years ago. I think it was out of Japan. And we've all just glommed on to, the need to walk 10,000 steps because there was a company, a couple decades ago who really wanted us to start wearing a step counter. So talk to us a little bit about how you sort of vetted, the studies that you cite, because your book, unlike a lot of other, HR type, workplace books, you get into the granular level of, where the information is coming from. And you are using metrics where you can actually, apply them. It's not just, sort of feel good stuff.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Very important. And I remember that I read that same many times about somebody threw a dart at the wall, and 10,000 sounds like a good number. And it's probably pretty close, but if you really look at research very carefully, I don't know the exact number, but it may be 11,320 steps, right? But it's impossible. It's not 10,000, right? It just can't be perfectly rounded off. But at least it's everybody started. The research source is so critical. Oh, God, you have these wellness companies doing wellness studies to show how important it is to have a wellness program. It is important to have a wellness program. But I can't even start with a firm like that. But don't tell me, you've got your own issue. You want to sell your products. The consulting firms are notorious for this. All of them, McKinsey even, they'll create something and a market for employers to say you need to be. I remember it was way back in the Bush administration, George W. Bush, when they were running around selling Iraq to go into after we won that war and took over that country. Yeah, let's go in and start a business in Iraq. And Commerce Department was running around pushing it. So it all depends on the source. Look, one of the biggest contributor to the American Cancer Society is Oscar Mayer. These are, it's crazy. You have to look at who's funding the research. And there are very, very few sources that are credible. I happen to find that Gallup happens to be very credible to me. They don't seem to be bought out by. I think Consumer Reports, if you were in the personal consumer products, is an independent source. Okay, I think Society Human Resource Management is an independent source when it's done the research. But when you get the consulting firms doing research, or the wellness companies, or the insurance companies, you got to really have one eye open and say, why are you doing this research, and what are you really saying? And because it can all be manipulated very easily. So thank you for bringing that up.
My last question for you is, what advice do you have for entrepreneurs who are not only faced with the economic challenges of running their business, but also what advice do you have them for managing diverse workforce, you've got all the DEI out there, you've got the sort of the Gen Z with a lot of the woke issues that have come up, and which even invokes litigation. So what advice do you have for them going forward? And last, my last question will be to tell our audience where they can learn more about you and order your book.
Okay, thank you. I think overall the wokeness, the DEI initiatives, all of that is for the better good. I think perhaps the pendulum has swung a little bit too far in a certain direction, and people are hiring those of color that are of diversity for diversity's sake, and not necessarily the most qualified person for the job. I think the most qualified person for the job should still be the person who gets the job, no matter what gender, race, etc. I'm a firm believer of that. At the same time, be open to all different shapes and sizes and individuals to do that, but don't make it an initiative that we're going to hire. So I'm at risk of being canceled from saying this, but like the CEO of United Airlines said he's going to hire X number of DEI as pilots. And I'm going, well, are they trained? I'm on that plane. That's, you're messing with my life at that point, right? Now, that's great if they have a longer training period, whatever it is, an initiative to do an apprenticeship program. But don't just make a statement like that because of diversity's sake. That doesn't help them, by the way, because then I go on a plane. If there's a black pilot, I'm going to go, oh my God, he's hired because the CEO just wanted a black person. And that's not fair to that person who's in the position by making statements like that. He could be perfectly qualified.
You don't want a pilot that's just hired for the sake of diversity. You don't want a surgeon who's hired for the sake of diversity. Those are real issues that people are concerned about. We all want the most qualified person, obviously, in the position. Well, tell us where our audience can find out more about you and what you do, and also purchase your book.
It's richardpolak.com, or you can buy the book on Amazon too. So Richard Polak, Polak, one L, no C. Everybody spells it wrong, but I was the original Polak. So everybody added a letter later on. richardpolak.com.
richardpolak.com, and you can buy the book on Amazon. It's certainly worth a read. Well, Richard, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on Main Street Matters today. We are America's small business megaphone, and thank you all to our audience for taking the time to listen in. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network.com. New episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. You can subscribe to the show at salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcasts from, and we'll be back soon with another episode.